guys? Joe Szymanski here. How do you like that, Mason Nation? Another big win for your Patriots today. Student section absolutely showed out. Go green and gold. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's still the summertime. It's in fact a heat wave time. But for us in Mason Nation, well, Palmer, it's technically kind of sort of the end of the first half of the offseason because Mason officially has a full roster. It's an exciting time for Mason Nation. We have our full 13 field roster for the 2024-25 season, and that means we can talk about not only the potential lineups, we'll talk about our new addition, but we'll also try and talk about, so we've seen some pieces of the schedule puzzle also get filled in the last week. But Palmer, obviously the first thing, it's the biggest news of the past couple of weeks for George Mason. The roster has been filled out. It was rumored, it was known that George Mason was looking for the third big man to be a part of that front court behind Jalen Haynes and Giovanni Imagiru. Palmer, tell us a little bit about Mason's new project, Stas Svika. Can you give us a little insight into him?
So he's going to be, or he's a freshman, but he's 21. I think he still gets his 4 years. Uh, he will. I'm not going to say he won't get any playing time early, but I don't see him. There's there's too many guys on the team for him to really play early on. He'll probably be a really really good defender, as like a one-on-one guy. I could see him playing 5 or 10 minutes in a couple games just because they decide we need somebody who can match up against this certain guy. Uh, he's big or he's tall. I've seen 6'10", 6'11". That's really big for the A10,
Yeah.
especially when you consider he's really athletic. So he's a project guy, and that could really pay off in a couple years.
Yeah, so Stas, obviously his background is that he's been playing pro ball in his home country of Slovenia for I believe since he was 15 years old, so that'd be for the past 6 years in some capacity. He's been playing at the at some level professional basketball in Slovenia. He's decided to come to America, get an education, obviously get D1 basketball playing opportunities at George Mason. This is very interesting, though. This is kind of the second time where we've seen Mason dive into the international market. And again, it's with the third big. Nico Pavret, if you remember from last year, was a guy he was from France. He obviously had played at Central Michigan previously, had transferred in, tried to kind of bring him in as a third big guy. Obviously, he got opportunities overseas that he felt were better. But if Stas is coming over here from those opportunities in Slovenia in his home country, you have to think, Palmer, the worries that we had with Pavret probably aren't going to show off with Stas.
Yeah, if yeah, as you said, if those opportunities won't show up over the summer, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, so this is a good thing though. So that means, of course, as you said though, the entirety of Mason's roster is filled. We have all 13 guys. That now includes 3 freshmen, of course, if you're counting Stas, along with Justin Begg and Bryson Coakley. That means 3 freshmen and 10 guys who are, in some level or form, we have a couple sophomores, obviously, age-wise. Jeremiah Quigley kind of being the big name there. We have a couple of guys who's got 2 years left. And then we have a couple, of course, of the fifth-year guys. We're talking about Woody Newton, Darius Maddox, and Alapa Palmer. When you have a full roster, that means people are talking about how this team will line up next year, how this will go. So let's I think the bigger question, I think you would agree, and I think most of Mason Nation would agree that the front court for George Mason is probably pretty set. With transfers and the guys who've come in. Darius Maddox, obviously, with him staying, is solidified. And the 3 spot there, Zach Anderson, the transfer from FGCU, is very much expected to hold down the 4 spot. And then Jalen Haynes, of course, after his required year off, is going to be taking the 5 spot. But it seems like the questions for George Mason rely in the backcourt. Palmer, can you tell, especially if we have some listeners who are not maybe the most diehard Mason fans, why Mason is the biggest question this offseason and the biggest battles in summer during the summer camps are probably going to be for those positions in the backcourt.
I think it's just there's just so many guys there, and some of them are proven, but some of them are unproven with much higher upside. Like uh, Katie Johnson is proven as a two guard defensively, but you don't really know how that offense is going to translate to the A10. He could be crazy. Basically, he could be beating everybody in a race to the rim, and all those Auburn inefficiencies don't matter because he's the most athletic guy in the conference. Uh, Quigley is really good defensively, not bad offensively. Everybody has a role. Everybody, like, I could see getting major playing time. There's just so many guys.
Yeah. So we talk about it, obviously, when we talk about the spots of the 1 and the 2, it does kind of at the very least, it looks like the top two in both of those spots. It's going to be KD Johnson and Jeremiah Quigley at the point guard spot, and then you're going to have kind of the battle between returning fifth-year senior Jared Billups and new transfer Braden O'Connor kind of look like battling it for that spot. I think kind of the conversation, Palmer, might be around, can George Mason afford to have both KD Johnson and Jared Billups out there at the same time? I think that's the big question. I think Tony Skinn and this coaching staff is probably going to have to answer, I think, because you know and I know neither of those guys really can shoot the threes. And even if, like you said, if because of how athletic he is and because of his speed, KD Johnson, his abilities at the rim, kind of the issues he had at Auburn might go away, but that doesn't mean his 3-point shooting suddenly also magically gets better. Do you think because of that, do you think this maybe comes down to, look, if it's KD Johnson out there, we're going to have Braden O'Connor out there because he can shoot that three ball more efficiently, or at least, in the past, he has shot the three ball much more efficiently. And we're only going to have Billups and Johnson out there if we're really trying to shut down a team, or a group of guards out there. You go back to maybe like Richmond last year, or you even think some of these other teams that we play at. I would think maybe even Dayton to an extent, where you'd probably want a team that was kind of focused on, if you could shut down the guards, then you're probably going to win that game. That seems to kind of be going to be the discussion point. Do you think we're going to see more of Braden O'Connor than maybe some people would expect, just because the recognition that maybe that team needs that third 3-point guy out there?
I think so. And I think you could put, as you said, with the defensive lineup. I think that really depends on whether Jalen Haynes can shoot the three,
Hmm.
because we've seen some stuff that says he could shoot the three possibly, and I think you could run Johnson and Billups at the 1 and 2. I'll call it reasonably often if Haynes can be a quality 3-point shooter.
Yeah, if you think if Haynes can, and we've seen, if you follow him on Instagram, you've seen him post some practice clips of him stepping out and shooting the 3-point. You think if he can do that, you think that's maybe the point where Tony Skinn and Co can say, we're okay with kind of having Jared and KD out there in the backcourt, because we know Jalen, along with, knowing that Darius and Zach Anderson can shoot the three ball probably from wherever. We're okay if Jalen can also consistently step up and hit a three every once in a while, kind of like Amari Kelly was
Mhm.
able to do, honestly, obviously, if you remember from last year. If he can do that, so you think that's where this team can, or this coaching staff are probably more comfortable with the KD Jared backcourt.
Yeah, I don't think it would be the starting. I still think O'Connor gets the start, but I think you could run the Johnson Billups reasonably, and it not be a problem.
Yeah, so obviously, kind of, and then they're kind of, we talk about it. The guys coming off the bench, obviously, like we said, that Katie, that Billups, O'Connor two role kind of seems to be, at the very least, that probably is the one that needs to be the most figured out in terms of who's getting the minutes. But you look at this depth on this team. You still have Austin Ball, who could definitely take a step in his sophomore year. You have Woody Newton, who's going to be an important player in his fifth year off the bench, both defensively and if he can be consistent as a 3-point shooter as well. Uh, and then you've got the freshman. So really, it seems like the question might be in Gio Imagiro as well as the backup. But then you've got the three freshmen. Do you think of those three freshmen? Is it going to be Justin Begg? We've seen the highlight tapes. We've seen the athleticism that he brings even at his height. Is he going to be the guy that you think is going to get the most minutes off the bench, or is it going to be a guy, excuse me, a guy like Stas who might need to get more minutes off the bench, maybe just because of positional need where he's at?
I think that more depends on how Katie Johnson does at the one. If he isn't, if they kind of figure out, oh, he's not going to be a lead ball handler, then I think Begg could be the backup point guard, and
Hmm.
you're not worried about it. Uh, with I'll call if everything goes correctly, I think I think uh, Sivka gets the most just because he's I just see a guaranteed role for him. So like not a lot, not a big role, but a guaranteed like yeah they're gonna face against some big. So like yeah, we need Sivka out there.
All right, Palmer. Well, let's get into the final part of our segment here and be talking about the upcoming schedule for George Mason's basketball team next year. And we have seen a lot of the pieces of the puzzle get put in these last couple of weeks. The biggest name, I think, for sure, that's on the list of the puzzle we put in, we're going to Marquette. We're going to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Marquette, one of the best Big East teams in the league last year, will be hosting George Mason as part of their own kind of tournament style thing. Mason will also be playing Stony Brook and Central Michigan at home through this event. But the big one, of course, will be Marquette uh, in fact, not at their usual arena. They usually play out of the Fiserv Arena where the Milwaukee Bucks play. But this is going to be an interesting choice, I think at least. This is going to be their students only game at the, I believe it's the Al McGinnis gym, or I probably screwed that up, but it's going to be at only a 3,700 seat gym where only students will be allowed in. So not even us visiting Mason fans, unless you somehow get a press request, you will not be allowed in the building. Palmer, talk to me about this Marquette team and why we've talked about this already, why you think it's an interesting choice that they've chosen this game, I think, to be the student game. Because that Mason's not usually the caliber of team that you would think a group, a Power Five would choose to pick in a game like this.
I think they're underestimating Mason, and they probably think that they have a guaranteed win. And I'll say Mason's around the 100th best team next year. That's not guaranteed, especially if it's early in the year. You just lost your point guard who's been there for a couple of years. They could be, they could have some growing pains.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's certainly, at the very least, on the onset, on paper, it feels like that could be a more winnable game of kind of, we have two Power Five non-conference opponents. We got Marquette and we got Duke. It does seem like on paper that Marquette would be kind of be the if you want to say from like 0.01% against Duke. I think a lot of people would put our odds at. I think you would probably get, some people would say Mason probably has a 5 to 10% chance against Marquette next year. You talk about it like you said, Tyler Kolek, obviously of previous Mason fame for his one season here on the last season of the Dave Paulson era. But like you said, 3 years there as point guard under Shaka Smart, big deal. Grew into one of the best point guards in all of college basketball. Looks like he's going to be a first round pick tomorrow night with the NBA. Looks like he's going to go in the high to mid 20s. So he will be, I think, the first round pick, I think, that has any connection to George Mason, either in history or a very long time. I'm not sure either way there. But this is going to be a really interesting game. I think this is at least of, like I said, I think of the two Power Five games we have, it feels like this one's the most winnable. But Palmer, talk about Stony Brook and Central Michigan. Do you think we've talked about this previously online? You want to see a couple Q3. You want to see Q3, potential Q3 games get built up in there. It seemed to be kind of the Dayton formula last year. Dayton did really well in these Q3 games. They just win them. They beat down a lot of these teams, and it really helped improve their status. in the important rankings for tournament bids. Do you think either Stony Brook or Central Michigan could be an option for those for Q3 games?
Stony Brook was a Q3 or it was either Q3 or close. It was on the edge.
Yeah.
It was close enough that I had to look up whether they were Q3 or Q4. Uh, Central Michigan's gonna be weird because they were bad last year. But I looked at their roster today, and they have a bunch of JUCO guys and a bunch of transfers. I think it was 4 or 5 returning
Hmm.
players who, yeah. So it's like you don't really know what
Yeah.
that's gonna be.
And you know, you look at the other parts of the schedule. Let's talk about some of the other parts schedule that's come across here. I believe there's been a game against Penn that was confirmed, and a game against UNC Asheville that was confirmed. That adds on not only to the kind of the Marquette sideline games through Stony Brook and Michigan that were in Central Michigan that we're getting. And also remember that we have the Duke game that was already scheduled, and then there are the final parts of the home and homes that we have against Tulane and East Carolina. East Carolina will obviously be away this year, while Tulane will be making the visit to Eagle Bank Arena. Uh, Obviously, UNC Asheville losing the two-time reigning SoCon Player of the Year. You feel like that's a team that's probably who was a Q3 game, or at least on the precipice of being a Q3 game. The last two seasons is probably not going to be that this year. Palmer, but talk about these other three teams: ECU, Tulane, Penn. Do you think there's, if of all those three teams, what do you think is the possibility to kind of be Mason's best win of kind of these non-Power Five groups?
Tulane is tough because I know they lost their guy. They lost Sion James to Duke, and the big forward guy. I can't remember his name.
Cross,
Something
well, Kevin Cross, I think was his
Kevin
name.
Cross. Uh, he's in the draft. He worked out with the Wizards. That's the only reason I know that. So that's one of those things you just don't know. Like they were pretty good last year, but they lost so much, so you just don't know there. Uh, ECU. I feel like every time I looked at ECU, their Ken Palm was 50 spots away from what it was the previous time I looked at it.
It was
So
I know what you're talking about. ECU was
yeah,
weird last year. That was a weird
because
team last year.
at some points it was like Ken Palm said they were going to beat Mason, and then it was like actually they're sub two. They're outside the top 200 now. So it's like you just don't know with them either.
Yeah.
Uh, Penn, I don't know. I thought they were going to be Q3, and then I realized well they were Q4 last year, and they lost a player to Villanova, so they probably aren't going to be Q3.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you would think that at least going away to East Carolina, as long as they stay semi decent, that will be a Q3. That'll be a Q3 game just based on the fact, unless they really suck. Like that
Yeah.
will be a Q3. That will be a Q3 game, kind of like Tulane last year. Even though Tulane kind of ended on a really low streak, that stayed a Q3 game just because of the fact that we went there, we won that game. Obviously, you're going to want Tulane to be a little better than they were last year, so that if we do beat them at home this year, that stays at the very least a Q3 game. Uh, but really, this is kind of shaping up. There's not that many spots left. Palmer, if you're talking about what we have left to fill out the schedule, what would you like to see Mason do?
Well, so the dates for the Marquette game is on the 8th, which is the first Friday of the season.
Yeah,
So Mason probably opens up on that Monday. Let that be one of those 355 teams, free win open the season.
let's get Morgan State in here like we did in the
Yeah,
Kim English era. Get and bring
yeah,
in Morgan State. That sounds like a
yeah.
good. That was a good team to beat up on. Yeah, that got everyone excited for the new era.
Yeah,
I
Chad Venning
remember
was on that
that.
team.
What?
Chad Venning was on that team.
That's right. I remember that. Yes. I think he was the only guy who gave us any problems really that night was Chad Venning. And then we tried to get him in the transfer portal, and that didn't work. So, uh, but yeah, for me, I think I would love it if we could try and find a way if like a Mountain West, a higher level AAC team, just someone who we think could be a Q2 game even at home, whether that's getting a home and home where we go to there, we come to, we go to there at one point, they come to us. Something that we think could be a Q2 game this year that is winnable. I would really love to see that. We talk about the idea of the Atlantic 10 and the Mountain West, that those are two conferences that it feels like there should be a match there, to do kind of a similar like SEC Big Ten challenge type thing, where we match up together. It feels like that could work. I would love to play like a Colorado State, a New Mexico, even a UNLV. I would love to do that, or maybe even what might be a lower level Big 12 team. Obviously, I think so many Mason fans would have some fun if we had to go down to Orlando and had to play UCF. Uh, obviously, there would be some people would have a lot of fun with that, but I think that's kind of what I'm looking for, Palmer, is the idea of like, can this team find a Q2 game that could, if we win it, could take our out of conference record to the next level and could help us potentially, if we have that good season in conference, could help us compete for that at large bid.
Yeah, I hope they can find it, but that's just so hard to get this late.
It's so hard.
You kind of think if that was there, I probably would have announced already.
That's true. You would have hoped that. But otherwise, Palmer, that's where we're going to end this version here. Thank you, folks, for listening to the Onward to Victory podcast. We will be back here, hopefully, at some point during the summertime, as we start to see the lineup build out more and more as summer practices continue. But for now, I'm Joe Szymanski. He is Palmer Johnson in the big hat. We will see you next time. This has been the Onward to Victory podcast presented by Giant Killer Doc